Go ahead and talk about and take some notes on some of this stuff. So I'm going to have you guys just follow on screen, jot your notes down, and then we'll transition to working with some of these items. What I want to do is I want to talk about the Windows overview, and I want to talk about some of the views and menu system options. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just kind of break down what windows we see, what windows are important, and how we're going to use them. Now, I'm actually going to see, I don't know if they activated it. Oh, they did. Okay. First thing, do me a favor, write the following key command. It is Control plus the down arrow. Control plus the down arrow. The Control plus the down arrow, and then you can just write beside it, this shows all application windows open. So any open application window, when you hit Control down, will show. So if we had multiple application windows open, it would show all of them. At this point in time, you see the two. So Control plus the down arrow shows all application windows that are open. You guys ever been lost in your software, like when you're working on stuff, and you're like, I know the window's there, but I can't seem to find it. Well, downside to Pro Tools is there's a ton of different windows, and they can all be layered upon each other. Some of them are large, some of them are small, and because of it, it makes it a little confusing to kind of access them, and a lot of times people tend to close windows in order to get to new windows, and that creates a problem. Jot this little note down. You can just write it as a quick tip. If you close all Pro Tools windows, it will close your session. So closing all your windows is a problem. And by closing them, you would be hitting the little red X in the corner there. And a lot of people tend to, like, they can't find something, so they close their windows, not realizing that actually closes the project. Does that make sense? So closing all your windows will shut down your Pro Tools, or close your Pro Tools session. All right, so let's take a quick look at these windows. Now, there's not much to see here, but if we use our key command that we talked about last week, Control-Shift-N, and we make some new tracks, all of a sudden, when I go do the Control down, now all of a sudden we see something going on the right-hand side. So when the right-hand side essentially has active tracks, it looks more like it should in your version of it right now without active tracks. There's not much going on. You can't really tell what the windows are doing. What we're looking at here, though, is we have two major windows, all right? And this is the thing that you need to note, all right? So this is where you want to jot this down. There's two major windows. The first one is called Edit, and the second one is called Mix. Okay, there's your edit window, there's your mix window. So there's two major windows in Pro Tools. The first one's called edit, the next one's called mix. Now, technically, we can cascade or attach these windows so that they are one and the same. We could make these merge to be the same thing, but it's super complicated to deal with it, and it doesn't leave enough real estate for it to be functional. So a lot of times what we do is we try to let the edit window be for editing purposes, and we let the mix window be for mixing purposes. A lot of times that's the reason why you'll see most facilities have dual monitors. You can leave the edit window on one, leave the mix window on another. Does that make sense? Now, actually, you guys have not been in, some of you have not been in the control room A. For those of you who have been in control room A, in the studio next door, you may have noted that there is a controller surface in front of the computer system. You can actually purchase a peripheral controller that does the majority of the functions that the mix window does in order to allow you to not need it open all the time. But there's a lot of instances where you can't really get around it. I always suggest to individuals, I'm going to show you how we configure these windows, but the biggest thing is to let them function 100% focused in their job territory, because we can actually do some mixing elements in the edit window, but then we lose all the real estate. So you got that down, edit and mix so far. Okay, what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to show you a couple of additional windows in the peripheral, and I'm going to get rid of this for now. And if you were to just draw this, you could just draw this little icon on your notes. This little symbol right here, the arrow with the little line behind it, Hey guys. So that arrow with the line behind it, you could just put equals expandable window panes. So anytime you see any of these anywhere in Pro Tools, that's an expandable window pane. Which means if I click it, all of a sudden I get a new window open and available. And of course you can resize it like you're familiar with in most applications, but you see one here, you see one here, you see one over here. I don't know if you can see this very well. There's one here. If we look on the other window, there's one here, down below as well. So again, this will expand different windows for you. We're going to talk about what these windows mean a little further in depth as we go, because we're going to be using some of these a little more fluidly. But our next item to mention is this icon. You can't really see it very well here. I'll switch to this one. Is this little window icon. And it essentially just looks like this shaded box with these open spaces. It'd be helpful for you to just draw a little image of what it looks like. These are found throughout the window panes. This essentially is, and you can see it has a drop-down arrow beside it. That's part of the image. This is a view selector for what you see in the window. Now, one of the biggest complaints I get from students in most cases when they're starting off is maybe they own Pro Tools at home, and when they're working on Pro Tools at home, they see different things on screen than they do when they're in the classroom. And it's because your windows are completely customizable, and you can actually save and program the layout for your own use. Okay, so depending on what you want your layout configuration to be, you can actually save that layout itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this just to kind of show you what I mean by that. Oops. Oh, jeez. One sec.
What's that one called?
That's the window view selector. Okay. Actually, I'll keep going. Now, notice there's one here, there's one up here, there's going to be one down below, there's one in the other mix window that'll program specifically what is happening. If I click on this drop down, you'll notice a whole list of things that can be visible. Now, I'm going to select minimal, and that's kind of where we usually start by default. This is what it looks like with minimal information. In the edit window, what we normally will see are the waveforms that can be edited, or MIDI that can be edited. Okay, so typically in the edit window, in your notes, I'd write a little information. The edit window essentially holds waveforms, MIDI data, and automation. All right, so your edit window holds waveforms, MIDI data, and automation. We're going to go to the mix in a second, but for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of these options here of what can be visible in this. I'm going to go ahead and select all down here in the drop-down. Essentially, the issue with viewing so much information is when I open all, it includes a lot of different views that I get in the mix window, one of which is comments. Like if I want to write, this is where you write your notes. You know, if this was, let's say this was something that was recorded with a Beta 52. And maybe you just say direct placement. A note about what kind of microphone was used on the instrument. That's where the comment field will go. There's some information about the mic pre, if it's a digital mic pre. In this case, we don't have those kind of external digital mic pre's. There's an instrument view, which is only viewable if we're using the instrument track. So not needed for non-instrument tracks, okay? So if we're using audio tracks throughout and we don't have a single instrument track, it's not usable. Now the interesting part that comes in here is you'll see this in the mix window. Inserts A through E, this little panel here, inserts F through J. And then sends A through E and sends F through J. We're going to talk about these in depth in the future, but essentially these are where your plugins reside in the insert panel. The inserts, and those banks essentially represent A through E, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? And so on. So this essentially these go through that list, and these offer you the option to throw in particular plugins into these banks, which means technically you can have 10 plugins on each channel. So this is just a simple EQ plugin. But that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking, plugins. And then in the sends section here, this is where we can tell it to do that advanced routing. Remember that when we talked last week or Monday about track types and we talked about aux inputs. Aux inputs, one of their things it could be used for are effects or bus routing. And that's what these particular sends are used for in order to route to those aux inputs. And then over here on the end, we have the input-output, which is essential, but it's not essential, again, not essential for this edit window, but it is essential for the mix window. This will tell us, after we mapped our I/O, this will tell us what locations are going to be used as an input. So like if we wanted on audio track 1, if we wanted to use mic 1's input from the interface, we need to attach it there. And then we'd have the main output. The output 1, 2 goes to stereo, and essentially it'll be sent to your speakers or your headphones. So the big thing here is in those view options, they're completely expandable, but the problem with them is they take up a lot of real estate. So you see how much of the view we lost of the edit window. So essentially half of the window gets lost. So in most cases for the view selector in accordance with the edit window there, you want to be at minimal. So I would write that as a note for your view selection options. So the view selector you can put view selector for edit window should be set to minimal. Unless there's something that you specifically need in addition to. Some people get annoyed by having to switch back and forth to the mix window. Now above, there are some ruler items up above. And in these ruler items, you see another menu set up top. And in this menu set up top, if you open it up, you'll see these are all the options that can be viewable in the rulers. So across the top, this section right here is the ruler view. And there's a couple things you see. BPM, I don't know if you guys are familiar with BPM. There's your tempo. You have your meter, which in this case it's 4/4, but you could change it. You can see it's listed over here, tempo meter. There's a marker lane where if we wanted to set or create some sort of markers and put them down, we'd have a set of markers that we could use. We're going to talk about those in the future and more in depth. We have samples. Samples is literally how many samples of those snapshots that are captured. And we could go down to the sample. We don't use it a ton, to be honest, in music, but it can be very useful in some instances. And time code, which of course is used for film. We also have feet and frames. I don't think, it's not up there, but feet and frames. There's time code version 2 in the event that there's multiple time codes being used in the same project, and you can actually modify that. And then the one that we use most often, minutes and seconds, and bars and beats. And so if I zoom in, I'm just going to zoom in for a second here. You'll see in bars and beats, there's bar 1, there's bar 2, there's bar 3, there's bar 4, there's bar 5. Cool part is if you look down in the grid, there's bar 1, there's beat 1, bar 1, beat 2, bar 1, beat 3, bar 1, beat 4, and this is bar 2, beat 1. If you guys know much about music, that is essentially a reference to measure by measure in quarter notes. That's going to be very useful for you from an editing standpoint when you're using the grid. We're going to get into that very, very soon. But again, just as an overview, these rulers essentially are designed to kind of keep you seeing the window very clearly and figuring out where you are in time. One other thing to mention about this window is all that stuff at the top is also customizable. Okay, or I should say the majority of the stuff at the top is customizable. One thing you could do up here, let's see if we can gain access to it. There's a drop down above the top. And this one looks a little different. It's literally just an arrow. But this drop-down view allows you to do the same thing and say minimal across the top, or let's do everything across the top. And there's a lot of different information up here. We're gonna have to essentially go item by item. And what we'll do with these item by item as we go is we're gonna talk about what each function does. Some of this is very advanced stuff that you see as a single button on the screen. But you'll also notice that down here below, there's a couple other things that can be viewed, and you can see these two are the exact same items that belong on the side. So you won't necessarily be responsible for knowing that right away, but it's very important to understand what is in the window. I will say this, just because this is one of those functions, so we won't immediately go into drills with this, because this is one of those functions that's easily drillable yet until we move to the next stage. If you expand on the right side, there is a clips, what they call the clips list. It just says clips. Write this in your notes, clips. Expandable on the right side of the edit window. Okay, clips. Expandable on the right side of the edit window. What we're going to do momentarily is I'm going to have you guys import some audio into your session. And I'm going to teach you how to import that audio. But you're going to see anything that's brought into the session, whether it's MIDI data or whether it's audio, is harbored in the clips list. And if you were to record a piece of audio or to have some sort of MIDI in your session and you deleted it from the edit window, which means it's no longer playable, if you push play, it'll still reside in the clips list in the event that you want to go back and get it. So your clips list, so by definition, and just jot a note, your clips list holds audio tracks and MIDI tracks. It will also hold, you can add to that, region groups. Well, that we actually might not get to that for a while. But again, it's just some simple grouping that gets done in the operations. But overall, you're in your clips list, that's the information that's held there. So when I import a piece of audio and I actually have something on a track, it will actually reside here. Okay, let me jump to the mix window just for a moment and walk you through some of the basic elements there. If I open the menu down at the bottom here and I tell it to only show minimal, it literally will only show me faders, panners, and the buttons for operation, which are these guys: grouping, automation, and I/O. So this is the simplified version. We're going to walk through each of these stages, and we have to kind of talk about what each of these functions do. And what we'll actually want you guys to kind of soak in is the fact that, and this is super important, audio tracks will look different than aux tracks, right? You remember those other track type options? Then bus tracks, then master tracks, MIDI tracks, and instrument tracks. So by bringing up a different track type, the information that you see on screen technically changes. Not all of it, but some of it. And so you'll find that certain parameters are customizable per track. So let's begin here by expanding it all the way. And let's talk about how this is laid out. Now this I do actually want you to write down or jot down in order, just so you have some sort of reference. So, raise your hand if you ever worked with analog audio, like you worked with a mixer or something like that, to that degree. Okay, analog audio. Okay. And then of course, if you've worked with digital audio, and if any of you had no audio experience at all before this class, which is fine. Okay. Which is fine. So, the interesting part about what they did here is when they made Pro Tools, they made it to be applicable and inviting for people who already did audio, right? Not for new people, essentially. If they wanted to make it for new people who had no sense of audio, they could have done a different scenario than this whole thing. They could have essentially made colors and weird knobs, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't even have to, they wouldn't be forced to write something like insert or send. To you, if I said insert or send, by default, if you don't know anything about audio, it doesn't tell you much information, right? They literally, again, if this was made for newcomers, it could just say plug in, right? And that's what insert is, plug in. Or in send, it could say routing, and that's even in the I/O. The I/O essentially is just routing. So it's designed to be a little confusing because it's designed for all the terminology that everybody who had already used audio knew before. So jot this down, and you don't have to write banks A through E, banks F through J. Just write insert 10. Okay? So you have 10 inserts on a typical audio channel. And in those 10 inserts, they're designed for plugins. Okay, so you can just put inserts, 10, made for plugins. Now, as a side note to that, you might want to write what a plugin is. Now, a plugin, by definition, a plugin is essentially a virtual or digital component that does some form of either processing, manipulation of the audio, or it could be like a virtual instrument that essentially makes a sound. So a lot of times a plugin is just a software version of something that we have in the real world. So a great example, plugin, I don't know if you guys have ever, any guitar players, you know, this one's an easy thing to liken it to. A plugin could just be a distortion effect, or like a distortion pedal that you would use for your guitar. You know, a plugin could be a compressor, things you know, of that nature. A plugin could be, well, a good example of a plugin, you see it all the time in movies. You ever heard anybody's voice be modulated? A lot of times they'll use a plugin for that. You know, so if you're trying to make, or if you guys ever saw the newer Star Wars with Kylo Ren and his weird, funky sounding voice, it's not what they did with James Earl Jones, because James Earl Jones just literally used his own voice. For the Kylo Ren character, they had to drop and modulate the pitch of the voice so it was nice and low. In order to do that, they use a plugin. Does that make sense? So essentially, it's something that will manipulate the audio. Under that, please write sends, and you have 10 of those. The sends are responsible for, really, it's additional routing. I would put additional routing. So you have your inserts, you have 10. You have your sends, you have 10. And those are additional routing options. What the sends do is the sends actually create a split from the channel. So like you have one audio source, and it's coming down the channel, it's going to make it out to the master fader and be sent off to the mix. Okay, so the audio is going to be sent down the path and off to the mix. When the audio comes down the chain, though, and it goes through those sends, you now have 10 options of different places that you can split the audio off and send it to 10 different locations. The sends, I would put sends can be used for effects, subgroups, we'll talk about that, effects, subgroups, and monitoring. Like in the studio next door, we use the sends a lot for monitoring, and what we get to do is we actually get to create a new mix for like if everybody in this room was in a recording studio and everybody had a different instrument to play, everybody would want a different mix from one to another, because more than likely, like if you were going to play, like let's say you were going to play the bass, okay? You're going to play the bass, and you're going to play the drums. The bass player wants to hear specific things from the drums. A lot of times, bass player wants to hear kick and hat, and maybe a little snare, and maybe a little bit of everything, but mostly kick and hat, because those are the prime things to fall with the bass, from the bass to the drums. The drummer probably doesn't really, care much about what he hears of himself. Most drummers don't want to hear themselves because they can feel. They can feel what they're playing. Most cases, they want to hear the other instruments. So instead of him wanting to hear a lot of kick and hat, he wants to hear the bass player. Does that make sense? So because of that, that means you two are required to have two different monitor mixes. How we accommodate that is we will essentially say, all right, well, send A is going to be someone's monitor mix, and we'll send that to a set of outputs. Actually, that's not a good example. Let's say we send it to output 3, and then send B will be sent to output 4. And what we'll do with these is we will, did it open? Oh, it did. Hold on, let's see where it went. Oh, did not. There it is. Okay. And from this particular send, we get the opportunity to put a mix level there, and we open the other one, and we can put a mix level there. So we actually have the ability to set up 10 different mix levels coming out of that output being sent to someone's monitor. So it's a great example. We use that all the time next door. So that's how those sends will work. In addition to this, on your mix window, if you slide down, no send. here is your I/O routing. Sorry. Now, what I'm going to do immediately is I'm going to have you guys set up some I/O routing in your next drills. So right from here, this will be a continuation of the notes that you're going to use, but starting from here where we are, this is the part where you're going to have to make a